Crystal Griffith here with Emotions, Wisdom, and Your Body. We are officially on day 8, and today we are talking about a very specific emotion that every single one of us has probably felt at some time in our life, if not multiple times. So today's a really good topic, and I hope you'll share this video with your friends. So remember, I am not a doctor. I am just a researcher, and I'm here to share nuggets of truth with you that will bring edification, education, and encouragement. So remember, every day for 2021, I'm your girl for emotions. So let's talk about our emotion today. It is grief. Now this one could be a downer, but I really hope it's not for you. I hope it brings some enlightenment to what's going on in that brain and in that body as you're walking through your grief steps. In those stages, those lovely stages of grief, right? So let's really talk about how extensive this topic is. I'm really only going to hit the highlights today, and I really want you to just focus on the pieces that work for you, and then you can come back and revisit this video as many times as you want on YouTube. And if you're part of one of our programs, you're going to get it as part of our packages moving forward in the future when it actually comes off of public in 2022. So make sure you come back and re-listen to this one today. So let's talk about what grief is. So grief is a deep, poignant distress. It's caused typically by some type of bereavement. So that cause could be life's joys and life's griefs. Joy can actually cause grief. A lot of people don't realize planning a wedding in itself can cause so much stress. There's actually a loss of grief in not having to plan it anymore once it has happened. It is amazing what our brains do, isn't it? And so grief is also the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. And that's why with the wedding, because you have probably been planning it for a very long time. Now, with everything that's gone on in the last year, a lot of people are like, nope, let's just do it and get it done. So there's not a long planning period anymore for many people, but for some there is. That can also be high school. For a lot of people, there was a deep grief for a lot of seniors last year because they didn't get to really culminate in the celebration of life and victory of getting through 4 years of high school. My own daughter, who's 15, is going through grief now of going, am I ever going to get to have another school dance? Am I going to get to have a game night? Are we going to have events at the school where we can all congregate? You know, high school looks radically different for our teenagers today than it did for us, you know, just even 2 short years ago. So when we talk about grief, what you're seeing is there's positive and there's negative emotions. And they, interestingly enough, are independent of each other. You can actually have them both at the same time. They can co-occur alongside of each other. Those positive emotions play a role in regulating depression and other negative emotions that are associated with grief. There can also be conflicting emotions that play a part, such as relief. If you've been caregiving for somebody for any duration of time and that has really consumed your life, there is a sense of relief that almost like you get your life back, but also relief that they're not in pain anymore. So it can go both ways. And that conflicting emotions really can exasperate that grief feeling that you have, because then you feel like you shouldn't have those emotions. You shouldn't feel relief. You feel guilt or shame. And I got news for you guys. God didn't bring guilt or shame. God offers conviction. And truly, He wants you to feel relief in choosing what you were able to do for that loved one. And He loves you for that. He acknowledges you in that absolute amazing walk that you did with that person and that loved one who's now gone on. And so I just want to encourage you that there is no shame or guilt in feeling relief that now your life looks different. So let's talk more about what your body is actually doing with grief. When the brain is going through grief, it experiences an increase in activity in a variety of regions, and that's responsible for processing physical pain and emotions. And so those particular areas can also include those emotional pieces that we've already talked about in the brain, which include the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, that one right there. Those involve emotional regulation, memory. A lot of people with grief get brain fog, Multitasking, they can't do more than one thing. It's almost like there's a shroud over their brain. Organization and learning. And so when people are going through grief, and this can even be grief over the loss of a marriage, and that loss of marriage could be 6 months to 52 years. I've seen the range working with different clients of really walking through that grief, a loss of expectation of what that was going to be, having the empty nest, or even kiddos or adults who have walked through medical diagnoses, and now their life looks radically different in light of this medical diagnosis, and what they thought their life is going to look like moving forward in the future can look really different. And then for those of us as parents, while we're watching our loved one go through these medical diagnoses and realizing that our life with them is going to look very different. All of those are forms of grief. And we have to really identify that loss of expectation. It's super important to do that. And it's not all going to come at once. Things are going to hit you here or there. I had something hit me the other day. I was like, never thought about that one. Probably not going to happen. And so, walking through those, it's just going to be at a various point in time for you. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. So hold that thought. So when grief is affecting us, we know it's going to affect our prefrontal cortex, but there's also going to be loss of appetite, fatigue, nausea, lowered immunity, insomnia, heart palpitations, tightness in the chest, weakness, gastrointestinal disturbances, weight gain, or weight loss. A lot of people think grief automatically means people don't want to eat. Oh no, if you're an emotional overeater, the last thing you're going to do is give up food because that's your comfort level. Now that's a whole nother topic for another day for trauma. But you can have people who will gain weight during a grief cycle, and even memory loss and that brain fog we talked about. So in addition, caregivers, this is super important. Caregivers have probably, more than likely, neglected their own health, trying to help the person that they're caregiving for, whether that be a spouse, a parent, or a child, especially with special needs kids. When there's special needs kids involved, your health absolutely goes on the back burner, not by choice, often by default. And so however it got to the back burner, now there's this again, there's a relief to now I need to focus on my own health for however that came about. And here's what they find out. Their own health is now in jeopardy because they have let their own health lag for so long. So I really want to encourage you guys who know that somebody is caregiving, and you're not walking through grief right now, but you're at a place that you could walk and help them a little bit. I would encourage you to offer to caregive for them so they could set 2 or 3 appointments in one day that they could go and deal with some of their own health issues, even to the dentist. Like, we don't even think about things like that. But as a caregiver, you feel so consumed with making sure that they have all their needs met, for the person who needs your help, that you miss taking care of yourself, even for your teeth, your eye exams that need to be yearly, dentist appointments that need to be twice a year, and in all those fun little tests when you get to be over the age of 40 that you need to have done. So if you could step in and say, hey, I would love on this day of this month to be able to help you. You could tell me everything that I need to do for them for that day. And could you go set 3 or 4 health appointments for yourself that day to where you could just go enjoy some lunch out, and you can get your teeth taken care of and do that eye exam and whatever other tests you got to get done. I'd love to be able to help you do that. I'm telling you, it would just be so beneficial for caregivers. So on to my other piece about grief here. When we're walking through that with our own health, and we are walking through it with this grief and all of these physical issues, we may see more of those physical issues as we walk through the roller coaster ride of walking through grief. And I'm going to show you that picture in just a second, because we want to remember we first typically walk through denial. Even if we know the event is coming, there's denial, and you learn of the loss, and it's rendering you a little bit speechless. Like, I can't believe this is happening. You may feel shocked, you may feel numb, and this is really just a temporary way to deal with a rush of overwhelming emotions. It's a defense mechanism: fight, flight, freeze, or faint, right? And that's really what we're talking about there. Anger is typically the next phase, But again, who knows whether you're going to jump to bargaining, you're going to jump to depression, you're going to jump back to denial. It is truly a circular situation. As anger and reality sets in, you're faced with the pain of this loss and all those expectations that go with it. And you may feel frustrated. Again, those are those conflicting, coexisting emotions with grief. You may even feel helpless. And those feelings can later turn into anger. Like, why did this happen to me? How come it couldn't happen to somebody else? And we do think that way, and you may direct it towards other people, maybe even in God, or even in life in general. You're just mad at everybody. To be angry with the loved one even who passed away, that's pretty normal. And they left you alone. Bargaining during this stage, you dwell on what you could have done to prevent the loss. And in reality, there's probably nothing you could have done to prevent it. Common thoughts are if only or what if, and we can't live there. Those moments don't exist. We live in the present, moving forward. We live right now. And so you may also try and strike a deal with a higher power. In my line of work, that is never a good thing. That's called a transfer agreement. And that would look like, well, if you just give me the cancer and not on my kid, right? I'm willing to do whatever that looks like. And that is not striking a deal with the higher power. That is striking a deal with the lower power. And the lower power didn't have any power. So, just keep in mind those things that begin to consume our mind in the middle of grief. Now, the other thing that we talk about is depression. And often sadness sets in to an extreme length, either of time or an extreme length of depth, really. And so you begin to understand the loss, its full effects, if that's even possible, on your life and through your life and what life looks like in the future. Signs of depression can include crying, sleep issues, and that decreased appetite. And those are going to be more consistent as if you can never get out of them. They're there all the time. You may feel overwhelmed, regretful, and lonely. And people are going to call you. They're going to ask you, what can I do for you? How can I help you? And that may feel pretty overwhelming. And you can feel free to say, you know what? I have no idea right now. If you could just think of something for me, that'd be great. I can't think. And so from that is going to help you more than being able to answer the question, to be honest, sometimes. Acceptance is the final stage. And you accept the reality of your loss. It can't be changed. And although you still feel sad, you're able to start moving forward in your life. So I'm going to share my screen with you and I want to show you a couple of things here. So hopefully this is going to work well. So the first thing that I want to share with you is this photo of the stages of grief and your experiences. So you think that stages of grief are really just this lull into a valley and then you're going to come back up with loss of adjustment. The fact is, you're going to jump from hope to denial to fear to new patterns, to new strengths, to searching again, to loneliness, to depression, back to shock. I still can't believe this just happened. And so it just goes up and down and up and down around a circle. And here's the thing, it's okay because it's your path and it doesn't have to look like anybody else's. So I wanted to share that one with you. And then I want to share one other one with you before we go to the next example. This is just another example of that grief path from shock, denial, illness, even for yourself before you could possibly get to anger. There might be some guilt again, and then depression, remembering all those losses of expectations, the reality of what's going on. And then you begin to develop more positive emotions that take you to acceptance. And we're going to look at some of that piece in just a second. The last item I want to share with you is actually this ball meme that came about that I saw that I just think is such a phenomenal opportunity to understand how grief works. And so I kind of put this in the area of too much grief, although grief in itself, I don't know that you can ever have too much grief, but we want to really understand how it interacts with all those other conflicting emotions. So what you see on the outer perimeter are all of the emotions that we can play with. So there's disappointment and playfulness and happiness and joy and love and anger and all the other emotions that we can talk about. They can be all on the outer perimeter. And then grief itself is this huge ball within that box. And so as you think and have a moment of laughter, it's great. You hit the moment of laughter, but then guess what? That big, huge ball bounces off and touches the pain point. And you're like, oh, wait, the last time I laughed was so-and-so was this. And so then it causes a trigger of pain. And so as that ball bounces around, it's going to hit all the sides and then potentially hit the pain trigger. Now, as you walk through all the stages of grief, what does tend to happen is that ball of grief gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And so even though it never dissipates, because you're always going to have a heart. My grandmother died, oh my gosh, I think at least 20 years ago, I think it's been now. But I still remember her. I see roses, I remember her. I see gardening, I think of her. There have been more times than I can count that I want to pick up the phone and ask her what that flower was that I just saw. She was an amazing gardener. And then she made monkey bread. And I would love to pick her brain on how to make gluten-free monkey bread, because nothing that I do turns out. So, I mean, there are all these things that I would love to be able to pick up the phone and talk to her. And she loved Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy. And that was her back-to-back shows. And so even when she lost her vision, those were the shows. She could have called out those answers. So I'd love to sit and watch a couple of those with her. But I can't do that. But that grief has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. So I don't feel the pain when I think of all those things. But the ball of missing grandma is still there. And so it's just super tiny now. So just food for thought on how to think about pain. I just thought this was a great example of that. All right, so where does that leave us? So let me get my paperwork going back here. So let's talk about countermeasures, because everybody's grief is different. The depth, the length, the processing, how they interact with it, the conflicting and co-parallel emotions, all looks different for every single person. And some people are journalers. I have a good friend who lost their son at about, I think it was 26 weeks. And they took these beautiful pictures with him, and she shared her heart and has shared it vulnerably since that loss. And that has been a healing journey and process for her. And out of that grief, her husband came to know the Lord and really wanted to seek the Lord and understand what was going on and the whys. And from that, when he came to know the Lord, that helped him walk through some extremely painful medical diagnoses. And so you can see how one moment in time, even in grief, can really impact your life and those around you as you're moving forward. So the last thing anyone in grief needs is for someone to go, oh man, it's been 6 months, come on. Or it's been 2 years, or it's been 10 years. Shouldn't you be over this by now? You got to move forward, right? That's never going to help anybody. But just walking with them, holding their hand, listening to their stories. I got introduced in the last 4 months to a gentleman who lost his wife this year, or actually last year, I guess, in 2020. And he talks about her as if she's still here, and that's okay, because he's processing those emotions. And he's just re-entered the dating scene, and it's such a beautiful thing to hear him talk, and then the person that he's dating to just reaffirm those moments to say, yes, that's okay. We want to hear about her because we know you loved her for many, many decades. And so that doesn't go away. So in those expectations, just allow some grace, some time, and some space. Resources truly are one thing, but those expectations, they're quite another. And so remember, they can tend to do more damage than good to the one who's grieving. So Grief Share is an excellent tool and resource to walk with a mourner in the journey of grief. And so for some, this can be pretty immediately. They've had a loss and maybe they get started in the group pretty quickly. For others, they might need 3, 6, 12 months, 2 years, 10 years to kind of just walk through it a little bit before they go into Grief Share. Grief Share is open for anyone who has an actual loss. So just keep in mind, Grief Share offers support groups, and they walk through a curriculum that is Christian-based. But from that perspective, you could have people in there who have not only lost siblings or parents or children, but they also could have had that loss through suicide, ODs, murders. And so I just want you guys to understand, not every group has the flavor of what you need. And so I've had multiple clients that I've referred over to Grief Share, and I hear their intake. I'm like, so how did that group work for you? And some are like, oh, it's perfect. And others are like, yeah, I don't think that's my group, because for some reason, all of them had something about suicide. I'm like, okay, no problem. Let's try this group over here. And then they go to this group over here and they're like, oh, that was the group that I needed. They happen to have all lost some family member, and that's kind of where I was, and it wasn't by something unexpected. So it worked perfectly. So again, just kind of give each group a different opportunity to try out, because you might find a different group is better for you. Now, with that said, let's talk about therapy for grief, because that is really an important tool as well. So therapists can help shift mourners' focuses from negative to positive focuses, and really provides a psychological break. It's a respite from the grief. Did you know you needed one of those? You actually need a respite from your grief sometimes. And that allows them to replenish, kind of filling up that bucket for them before they walk in it again. So basically, the research shows that just even a small increase in positive emotion, remember that's getting that dopamine, that oxytocin, a good hug. Oh, somebody in grief, man, give them a good solid hug, and it makes a huge difference for them. It releases that cuddling hormone, remember? And especially if the person that's passed was their cuddler, and now they're not there, their body is desperate for that. So one of the best things you could do is give them a hug. It's also why we really saw during that quarantine period of time that people were so lonely and isolated, because there was a deprivation of that oxytocin release within their body for that cuddling hormone. And the person, I saw this one picture, this person had created a shower curtain arm hold. And so they put their arms through the shower curtain so they could hug the person on the other side with having a barrier between them. I thought that was ingenious. I just thought people should have made those and given them away, because that was just a perfect example of how to still get that oxytocin, and they needed that connection and that touch. So as we're talking more about the research, it really, those positive emotions can result in an upward spiral of well-being. And that's characterized by better relationships with themselves, with their family, and a greater feeling of connection. So they're coming out of that grief, of isolation and loneliness, of processing it in their head all the time, but they're connecting. So what are our wisdom verses for all of this? So there's so many amazing verses in the Word that really talk about grief and really life, because that's the opposite of grief, is life, right? And so I just want to share a couple of them with you. And remember, put your name in here to personalize these. So John 16:22, now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will be able to take away your joy. Revelation 21:4, he will wipe every tear from your eye. And I didn't write down the verse, but there's another verse that says he collects every one of your tears. And there will be no death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things have passed away. And guess what? The new has come, right? So Psalm 34:18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He feels your pain. Can you imagine God seeing his own son on the cross, being crucified? Can you imagine his pain in that moment? He knows pain. He understands your loss. He gets it. And cry out to him. Absolutely cry out to him. He wants to hear that from you, because it is cathartic for your soul to release those feelings. And your tears, I wish I had thought to bring up that picture, but there is a meme out there. And if you Google or search different types of tears under a microscope, you're going to see it. And there are tears that look different for crying, and tears that look different for grieving versus just crying. Tears of happiness, when you're crying, laughing, belly laughing, and tears are coming out. Those tears look radically different. And so, God collects all of those. Isn't that the coolest thing? And he made all of them to be supernaturally different. And we can see it under a microscope. That's just unbelievable to me. Now, Psalm 5:4, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. These are promises, folks. They're not just words on a page. They are promises. And I can testify night and day that he fulfills his promises. He does. So positive emotions can improve the way people cope with their loss. And as a result of gaining some distance from the negative emotions, they're being restored and they're being replenished by those positive emotions. And mourners are able to begin to focus their attention on the tasks that are most important to them. You might see a huge shift in their lifestyle changes because in that moment of grief, they realize what's important and what's not, and what they used to be doing and what they want to be doing. And allow them that space and grace to walk through that and figure that out, because that's about their life, not yours. And it might make you uncomfortable. That's okay. Maybe you should ask the question of, why is that making me okay? Because that's a whole nother conversation, right? We want them to be able to make progress through their grief. So how do you use all this amazing information of grief and apply it to your life? Because we want to use the wisdom out of it, right? We want to hear it, we want to understand it, we want to apply it. So here's your 3 questions again. How has grief been showing up in your life? And again, this may not be a loss, a death. It could be a job change. It could be a house change. It could be a state move change. It could be a friendship ending. It could be different friends that are now moving into a different phase of your life. You know, I've had a lot of friends get remarried and they're just shifting in different things, and I don't run with the same crowd anymore. And so it's a different crowd, and I'm okay with that. I still call them. I still say hello to them. How are they doing? You know, what's the latest and greatest? We still go to lunch once in a while, but we're not as close as we used to be, because I understand and respect where their relationships have gone, and I'm not at that phase in my life. And so that's a loss as well. Anything like that, even the loss of a pet. A lot of people don't think about the pet sometimes, but that can be a big grieving, not just to you, but to everybody in the family, and how that pet used to interact in the family. So how has grief been for you? Has it been a positive or a negative? Has it been cathartic to where it has propelled you to re-examine your life and make different choices? And so how can you transform this grief that you've had by wisdom, by understanding, by knowledge, as you walk in it in the future? And that may not be in the same grief, but you know grief is going to happen moving forward in the future. So how can you transform that grief walking forward in the future? So don't forget, take the scriptures that we mentioned, add your name and personalize them, because he wrote them just for you. I'd love to see your responses on this topic. I think this one is really going to be the hardest hitting one that we've talked about so far. And notice that I kind of stopped cross-posting to everywhere with these, because I really want you guys to go onto Facebook for K. Crystal Griffith, Transforming Destiny Infused Lives. And I want you to join us there, or on YouTube. So we're going to begin to just put them in those 2 places, so you guys can get in touch with me at either one of those places, or at kcrystalgriffith.com, and sign up to receive more insights or your feelings wheel. But join us again tomorrow for Emotions, Wisdom in Your Body. Tomorrow, we are going to talk about repressed emotions, those pesky little things that hide in us. So come back for more tomorrow. You guys have a blessed night.